What is happening here?
There's nothing left to say right now about that.
For years, fans of Sister Wives have followed the complex and often emotional journey of the Brown family. From the early days of unity to the recent fractures that have reshaped everything, viewers have watched relationships evolve in ways no one could have predicted. But now, a new revelation is sending shockwaves through the fan base. This time, it centers around Janelle Brown, a figure who has long been seen as calm, practical, and often more reserved compared to others in the family. And according to growing speculation, Janelle may finally be speaking out. Not just about her own experience, but about something much bigger. Something that has been quietly sitting at the center of the Brown family dynamic for years. The legal marriage between Kody Brown and Robyn Brown. For longtime viewers, this topic is not new, but the way it's being discussed now feels very different. Because what was once explained as a necessary and practical decision is now being re-examined in a completely new light. And if Janelle's perspective is truly coming forward, it could change how fans understand everything that followed. To fully grasp why this matters, we need to go back to the moment that reshaped the structure of the family. When Kody made the decision to legally divorce Meri Brown, it was presented as a selfless act, a step taken so that he could legally marry Robyn. The reason given at the time was centered around Robyn's children from a previous relationship. The goal, according to the explanation, was to create legal security for them, to allow Kody to adopt them and ensure they were fully integrated into the family. On the surface, it made sense. It was framed as a decision made out of love and responsibility, and at the time, many viewers accepted that explanation. But even then, there were questions. Questions about the emotional impact. Questions about how this shift would affect the balance within the family. Because while the legal change may have been practical, its emotional consequences were far more complicated. For Meri Brown, the divorce marked a turning point, a moment that changed not only her legal status, but also her position within the family. And for others, including Janelle, it raised concerns about what this change truly meant. At the time, Janelle didn't appear to be openly critical. She maintained her usual composed demeanor. She supported the family's decision, at least publicly. But as the years have passed and the family dynamic has shifted, many fans have begun to wonder what she really thought. Because actions often reveal more than words, and the way relationships have evolved since that moment suggests that the impact may have been deeper than originally acknowledged. Now, with growing speculation that Janelle is opening up about this topic, the conversation is taking on new life. Fans are asking, was the legal marriage really just about the children, or did it change the balance of power within the family in ways that weren't fully understood at the time? Did it create a hierarchy, intentional or not, that affected how relationships developed? And most importantly, did it contribute to the fractures we're seeing today? These questions are at the heart of the current discussion. Because when a family structure is built on equality, even a small shift can have lasting consequences. And in this case, the shift wasn't small. It was fundamental. A legal marriage carries a different weight than a spiritual one. It comes with rights, recognition, and a level of legitimacy that can influence both internal dynamics and external perception. For Robyn, becoming the legal wife placed her in a unique position, a position that, whether intended or not, may have changed how decisions were made, how priorities were set, and how relationships were maintained. For Kody, it also marked a shift, not just legally, but emotionally, because over time, viewers have observed a growing closeness between him and Robyn, a closeness that some believe became more pronounced after the legal marriage. And this is where Janelle's perspective becomes so important, because she has often been seen as one of the most grounded voices in the family, someone who values fairness, independence, and practicality. If she is now questioning or reflecting on that decision, it suggests that there may be more to the story than what was originally presented. But it's important to approach this carefully, because much of what is being discussed is based on interpretation, on what fans have observed, on what has been shown, and what hasn't. Still, the fact that this topic is resurfacing now is significant, because it aligns with the broader changes happening within the family. The separations, the shifting relationships, the growing independence of each wife. All of these developments create a context in which past decisions are being reevaluated, and when that happens, new insights can emerge. Insights that challenge old narratives, that raise new questions, and that force both the family and the audience to look at things differently. As we move into the next part, we'll take a closer look at the timeline of the legal marriage, what happened, how it was explained at the time, and how those explanations compare to what we're seeing now. Because sometimes understanding the past is the key to understanding the present, and in this case, the past may hold more answers than anyone expected. To understand why the current discussion feels so intense, we have to go back to how the legal marriage between Kody Brown and Robyn Brown was originally presented on Sister Wives. At the time, it was framed as a necessary and selfless decision. The explanation was clear and consistent. Kody would legally divorce Meri Brown so that he could legally marry Robyn. And the reason? To adopt Robyn's children and provide them with legal security. It was positioned as a move made out of love, out of responsibility, out of a desire to protect and unify the family. For many viewers, this explanation made sense. It aligned with the values the family often spoke about: commitment, sacrifice, and doing what's best for the children. And at the center of it all was Meri. Her role in this decision was crucial, because she was the one who had to agree to the legal divorce. And from what was shown, she did so willingly. She spoke about wanting what was best for the family, about putting the children first, about making a sacrifice for something bigger than herself. It was presented as an act of strength, an act of love, and at the time, many viewers saw it that way. But even in those early moments, there were subtle signs that the situation might not be as simple as it appeared. The emotional weight of the decision was evident, even if it wasn't fully expressed. Meri's reactions, her pauses, her tone, her body language, suggested that this was not an easy choice. And that's understandable, because while the decision may have been practical, it also carried deep emotional consequences. A legal marriage is not just a piece of paper. It represents status, recognition, a different level of connection, and shifting that status within a plural family is bound to have an impact. At the same time, Robyn's perspective was also highlighted. She expressed gratitude. She acknowledged the significance of what was being done for her and her children, and she emphasized that the goal was to strengthen the family as a whole. But for some viewers, even then, there was a sense that this moment marked a turning point, a shift that would influence everything that came after. Because once the legal structure changes, the emotional structure often follows. And that's where the questions begin. Did the legal marriage unintentionally create a hierarchy? Did it change how decisions were made? Did it influence how Kody divided his time and attention? These questions weren't fully addressed at the time, but they lingered, and as the years went on, they became harder to ignore. Another important detail is how the adoption process was presented. It was shown as a major milestone, a moment of celebration, a sign that the family was coming together in a meaningful way. And in many ways it was. But at the same time, it also reinforced the significance of the legal marriage, because without that legal step, the adoption would not have been possible. So the two events became closely linked. One justified the other, and together they formed a narrative that felt complete, at least on the surface. But as viewers now look back, they're beginning to separate those elements, to ask whether the outcome could have been achieved in a different way, or whether the legal marriage carried implications that went beyond its original purpose. This is where Janelle Brown comes into focus, because while she supported the decision at the time, her current perspective, if she is indeed speaking out, could offer new insight into what was said behind the scenes, what concerns may have existed but weren't fully expressed, and how the decision was experienced by those who weren't directly involved. Janelle has often been seen as someone who values practicality, someone who looks at situations from a logical standpoint. So if she is now questioning the impact of the legal marriage, it suggests that there may be aspects of the decision that didn't align with the original narrative. And that possibility is what makes this discussion so compelling, because it challenges what viewers thought they understood. It invites a reevaluation of past events, and it raises the possibility that the story may be more complex than it once seemed. As we move into the next part, we'll explore how the family dynamic began to shift after the legal marriage, looking at changes in relationships, communication, and the balance within the household. Because sometimes the true impact of a decision isn't visible right away. It reveals itself over time.
After the legal marriage between Kody Brown and Robyn Brown was finalized, something began to change within the family, and longtime viewers of Sister Wives started to notice it. At first, the shift was subtle, nothing dramatic, no immediate conflict or obvious division. But over time, small differences began to add up. Moments that on their own might not have seemed significant, but when viewed together, started to paint a very different picture. One of the first things fans noticed was a change in how time was being spent. Kody's presence appeared to become more concentrated in one place, Robyn's household. While he had always divided his time among the wives, viewers began to feel that the balance was no longer equal. Some saw it as natural. After all, Robyn was now the legal wife, and her children had just been adopted. There were new responsibilities, new adjustments, and a need for stability. But others felt that the shift went beyond that it wasn't just about logistics, it was about preference. And that perception began to shape how fans viewed the family dynamic moving forward. At the same time, the emotional tone of the relationship seemed to change. Interactions between Kody and the other wives, particularly Meri Brown, became more distant. Conversations felt more strained. Moments that once showed connection began to show tension instead. For Meri, the impact of the legal divorce appeared to grow over time. What had been presented as a selfless act began to carry emotional weight. Viewers noticed moments of isolation, moments where she seemed unsure of her place within the family. And while she continued to express commitment to the family structure, there was a growing sense that something had shifted. For Janelle Brown, the changes were less emotional on the surface, but no less significant. Janelle has always been more independent, more focused on practicality than emotional expression. But even from her perspective, the evolving dynamic raised questions. She began to emphasize the importance of fairness, of independence, of maintaining balance within the family. And while she didn't openly challenge the legal marriage at the time, her focus on these values suggested an awareness that something had changed. Then there's the broader structure of the family itself. Before the legal marriage, the idea of equality was central to how the family presented itself. Each wife had a role, each relationship had value, and while differences existed, the goal was to maintain a sense of balance. But after the legal shift, that balance became harder to define, because legal status carries a different kind of weight. It influences not just how relationships are perceived internally, but also how they are recognized externally. And in a family already navigating complexity, that added layer can create unintended consequences. Some fans began to describe what they saw as a hierarchy, a structure where one relationship held more influence than others. Whether or not that hierarchy was intentional, the perception of it became increasingly common. And perception, as we've seen, plays a powerful role in shaping narratives. Another important factor was decision-making. Viewers started to question whether certain choices within the family were being influenced more heavily by one household, whether certain voices carried more weight, and whether the balance of influence had shifted along with the legal structure. Again, these weren't always obvious changes. They didn't happen all at once, but over time they became more noticeable, and as they did, they began to raise questions that are now coming back into focus. Was the legal marriage truly just a practical step, or did it create a ripple effect that changed the family in deeper ways? This is where the current discussion gains its significance, because if Janelle Brown is now offering insight into that period, it could help clarify what was happening beneath the surface. It could provide context for the shifts that viewers have been trying to understand for years, and it could challenge the original narrative that everything was done purely for the benefit of the children. At the same time, it's important to remember that families evolve. Changes happen. Relationships grow and shift over time. Not every change can be traced back to a single decision, but some decisions do act as turning points, moments that set new patterns in motion. And for many viewers, the legal marriage feels like one of those moments, a point where the direction of the family began to change, even if that change wasn't immediately clear. As we move into the next part, we'll take a closer look at how fans began to question this shift in real time, exploring the early reactions, the doubts that emerged, and the conversations that started long before the current controversy. Because sometimes the signs are there from the beginning, we just don't fully understand them until later. As the seasons of Sister Wives continued after the legal marriage between Kody Brown and Robyn Brown, something interesting began to happen, not just within the family, but among the viewers themselves. At first, the majority of fans accepted the explanation that had been given. The narrative was clear. The decision was made for the children. It was about adoption, stability, and doing what was best for the family as a whole. And for a time, that explanation held. But as new episodes aired and the family dynamic continued to evolve, small questions began to surface. Quiet at first, subtle, almost easy to ignore. Viewers started noticing things that didn't quite align with the original story. Moments where the balance seemed off, interactions that felt different from before, time spent in ways that didn't seem evenly distributed. And while none of these moments were dramatic on their own, together they began to form a pattern that led fans to ask, did the legal marriage change more than just paperwork? One of the earlier signs came from how often Kody appeared to be with Robyn compared to the other wives. Of course, there were logical explanations. Her children were younger, the adoption process required attention, there were new responsibilities that needed to be handled. But over time, the difference in presence began to feel more noticeable, and for some viewers, harder to explain. Then there were the emotional dynamics. Conversations between Kody and the other wives, particularly Meri Brown, began to carry a different tone. Where there had once been warmth, there was now distance. Where there had been effort, there now seemed to be hesitation. And while relationships naturally change over time, the timing of this shift didn't go unnoticed. Fans began connecting the dots, looking back at the legal divorce, looking at what followed, and wondering if there was a deeper connection between the two. For Janelle Brown, her role during this time remained relatively steady on the surface. She continued to present herself as practical and independent, focused on her own household, less involved in emotional conflict. But even within that steadiness, viewers began to notice subtle shifts, moments where she emphasized independence more strongly, moments where she appeared more cautious in discussions about family unity. These weren't dramatic changes, but they were enough to raise questions, because in a family where every interaction is observed and analyzed, even small differences can stand out. Another turning point in fan perception came through group interactions. Scenes where all the wives were together began to feel different, less cohesive, less natural, more guarded. There was a sense that something unspoken existed beneath the surface, and while it wasn't always addressed directly, viewers could feel it. That tension became part of the viewing experience, something that wasn't always explained but was clearly present. Online discussions began to reflect these observations. Fans shared clips, compared scenes, analyzed the behavior, and slowly a new narrative began to take shape. Not one that replaced the original explanation, but one that existed alongside it. A narrative that suggested the legal marriage may have had unintended consequences, that it may have shifted the emotional balance of the family, and that those shifts were now becoming more visible over time. Of course, not everyone agreed. There were still many viewers who believed the original reasoning, who saw the changes as natural evolution rather than the result of one specific decision. And that difference in perspective created an ongoing debate, one that continues even now. But what makes this moment so interesting is how those early doubts are now being revisited. Because if Janelle Brown is indeed speaking out or offering new insight, it gives those earlier questions new relevance. It suggests that what fans were noticing may not have been imagined, that there may have been more happening beneath the surface than what was shown. And that possibility is what's driving the current conversation. Because when past doubts align with present revelations, the story takes on a new dimension. It becomes more than speculation. It becomes something worth re-examining. As we move into the next part, we'll explore how the situation may have affected the relationships between the wives themselves, looking at shifts in trust, communication, and the sense of unity that once defined the family. Because in a structure like this, every change has a ripple effect, and those ripples often reach further than anyone expects.
As the effects of the legal marriage between Kody Brown and Robyn Brown continued to unfold on Sister Wives, one of the most noticeable changes began to appear in the relationships between the wives themselves. Because while much of the focus has always been on Kody and his role, the foundation of the Brown family was built just as much on the connections between the women. And over time, those connections began to shift. In the earlier seasons, there was a visible effort to maintain unity. The wives spent time together. They supported one another. They presented a sense of teamwork, even when disagreements existed beneath the surface. But after the legal marriage, that sense of unity seemed to weaken. Not all at once, not dramatically, but gradually, subtly, in ways that became more apparent over time. One of the most affected relationships appeared to be between Meri Brown and the rest of the family. Following her legal divorce from Kody, Meri's position within the group seemed to change. While she remained part of the family, there was a growing sense of distance. Moments where she appeared more isolated, less included in conversations, less connected to the group dynamic. And while that distance may have been influenced by multiple factors, many viewers couldn't help but connect it to the legal shift. Because that moment didn't just change her legal status, it changed her role. For Janelle Brown, the changes were more understated. She has always valued independence, often choosing to focus on her own household rather than becoming deeply involved in emotional conflicts. But even so, viewers began to notice a shift in how she interacted with the group. There was a sense of increased separation, a stronger emphasis on personal space, and a quieter, more cautious approach to family discussions. This didn't necessarily mean conflict, but it did suggest a change in comfort level. Then there's the relationship between Robyn and the other wives. From the beginning, her integration into the family had been a delicate process. Building trust takes time, especially in a structure as complex as this one. And while there were moments of connection, there were also moments of tension. After the legal marriage, those dynamics became even more complicated, because Robyn's new legal status placed her in a different position, one that, whether intentionally or not, may have created a sense of imbalance. For some viewers, it appeared that this imbalance affected how the wives related to one another. There were fewer shared moments, fewer scenes of collective unity, and more instances where interactions felt separate rather than connected. This shift wasn't always openly discussed. In fact, much of it remained unspoken. But that silence in itself became part of the story. Because when communication decreases, assumptions often increase. And in a family where transparency had once been emphasized, that change was noticeable. Another important factor was trust. In any relationship, trust is built over time, but it can be challenged by change. And in this case, the legal marriage represented a significant shift. Even if the intentions behind it were positive, the outcome may have affected how secure each wife felt within the family. Did everyone feel equally valued? Did everyone feel equally heard? These are questions that may not have been fully addressed at the time, but they lingered, and over time, they may have contributed to the growing distance between the wives. At the same time, it's important to recognize that relationships evolve. People grow, priorities change, and in a family as large and complex as the Browns, maintaining the same level of connection over many years is incredibly challenging. So while the legal marriage may have played a role, it's likely not the only factor. Still, for many viewers, it represents a turning point, a moment where the direction of those relationships began to change. And now, with Janelle Brown potentially offering new insight into that period, those changes are being re-examined. Because understanding how the wives' relationships shifted can provide a clearer picture of what was happening beneath the surface. It can help explain the distance, the tension, the lack of unity that has become more apparent in recent seasons, and it can offer context for the current state of the family.
As we move into the next part, we'll take a closer look at Kody's role in all of this, how his decisions, priorities, and relationships may have influenced these shifts, and what that reveals about the evolving structure of the Brown family. Because in a family built around one central figure, his actions often shape everything else. As the dynamics within sister wives continue to evolve, it became increasingly clear that understanding the situation required a closer look at Kody Brown himself. Because at the center of every relationship, every decision, and every shift within the Brown family is Kody. His role has always been complex. Balancing multiple marriages, multiple households, and a large number of children is not something that follows a simple formula. But over time, viewers began to notice that his approach seemed to change, especially after the legal marriage to Robyn Brown. In the earlier years, Kody often spoke about equality, about dividing his time fairly, about ensuring that each wife felt valued and supported. That idea of balance was central to how the family presented itself. It was part of the foundation. But as the seasons progressed, that balance appeared to shift. Not dramatically at first, but gradually, in ways that became more noticeable over time. One of the most discussed changes was how Kody spent his time. Viewers began to observe that he was present more frequently in Robyn's household. While there were practical reasons that could explain this, such as younger children or logistical needs, the consistency of that pattern raised questions. Because in a plural family, time is more than just a schedule. It represents attention, priority, emotional investment. And when that balance changes, it can affect every relationship connected to it. For Janelle Brown, this shift may have been particularly noticeable. As someone who values independence and fairness, any imbalance, whether intentional or not, would likely stand out. Even if she didn't openly challenge it at the time, her perspective now could provide insight into how those changes were experienced within the family. Then there's the emotional aspect of Kody's relationships. Over time, viewers began to notice a difference in how he communicated with each wife. With some, conversations became more distant, more strained, less frequent. With others, particularly Robyn, there appeared to be more emotional openness, more connection, more consistency. And while relationships naturally evolve, the contrast between them became harder to ignore. This is where the concept of priority comes into focus. Because when one relationship appears to receive more attention, it can create a sense of imbalance, even if that wasn't the original intention. For Meri Brown, this shift was especially significant. Her relationship with Kody had already been facing challenges, but after the legal divorce, the distance seemed to grow. Efforts to reconnect didn't always lead to lasting change, and over time, the emotional gap became more apparent. For Janelle, the impact may have been different, but still meaningful. Her independence allowed her to maintain a certain level of stability, but that doesn't mean she wasn't unaffected. Changes in family structure influence everyone, even those who appear less emotionally involved. And as the family dynamic continued to shift, those influences likely became more noticeable. Another important factor is decision-making. Viewers began to question whether certain decisions within the family were being influenced more heavily by one relationship, whether certain voices carried more weight than others, and whether the balance of influence had shifted alongside the legal structure. These questions are difficult to answer definitively, but they are central to the current conversation. Because if Janelle Brown is now sharing her perspective, it may shed light on how decisions were made behind the scenes, what factors were considered, and whether the process felt balanced to everyone involved. At the same time, it's important to recognize that Kody himself has faced increasing pressure over the years. Maintaining multiple relationships is inherently complex. Add to that the public nature of the show, and the challenges become even more greater. Expectations from the family, from viewers, from the structure itself, can create situations where no decision feels entirely right. And in those situations, choices can have unintended consequences. The legal marriage may have been one of those choices, a decision made for practical reasons that led to deeper emotional shifts over time. And if that's the case, it helps explain why the current discussion feels so significant. Because it's not just about what happened, it's about how those decisions shaped the relationships that followed, how they influenced trust, communication, connection, and ultimately, the direction of the family as a whole. As we move into the next part, we'll explore how these shifts may have contributed to the larger changes we're seeing today, including separations, independence, and the redefinition of what the Brown family looks like now. Because sometimes understanding the present requires looking at the decisions that shaped the past.
As the long-term effects of the legal marriage between Kody Brown and Robyn Brown continued to ripple through the family on sister wives, what once appeared to be small, gradual changes began turning into something much bigger, a full transformation of the family structure, and for many viewers, even a breakdown. At first, the signs were subtle: distance, ikhtiyatas, less communication, more independence. But over time, those signs became impossible to ignore. The family that once emphasized unity and shared zindagi began to look very different. Separate households started to feel like separate lives. Shared decisions became individual choices, and the emotional connection that once held everything together seemed to weaken. One of the biggest turning points in this shift was the departure of Christine Brown. Her decision to leave was not just a personal move, it was symbolic. It represented a breaking point, a moment where the idea of maintaining the family structure, as it once existed, was no longer sustainable. For years, Christine had expressed concerns about balance, about emotional needs, and about feeling valued within the family. And when those concerns reached a point where they could no longer be resolved, she made a choice that changed everything. For viewers, this raised a powerful question. Was this outcome connected to earlier decisions, like the legal marriage? While it may not be the only factor, many fans believe it played a role. Because once the balance within the family began to shift, it set off a chain reaction. And that reaction didn't stop with one relationship. Following Christine's departure, the distance between Kody and Janelle Brown also became more noticeable. Their relationship, which had often been described as practical and steady, began to show signs of strain. Disagreements became more visible, communication became more difficult, and eventually their connection seemed to change in ways that reflected the larger shifts happening within the family. Even Meri Brown, who had remained committed to the family for so long, appeared increasingly separate. Her journey became one of independence rather than integration, and while she continued to express loyalty, the emotional distance was clear. At this point, the original structure of the Brown family had fundamentally changed. What once was a tightly connected plural family had evolved into something far more fragmented. And at the center of that transformation was Kody's relationship with Robyn. For some viewers, it appeared that this relationship had become the primary focus, the one that received the most attention, the most time, the most emotional investment. And whether or not that perception reflects the full reality, it has played a major role in shaping how fans interpret everything else. This is where Janelle Brown's perspective becomes even more important, because if she is now speaking out about the legal marriage and its impact, it connects directly to these larger changes. It suggests that what seemed like a practical decision at the time may have contributed to a gradual shift, one that eventually led to the current state of the family. But it's also important to recognize that no single moment defines an outcome this complex. Relationships are shaped by many factors: time, communication, expectations, personal growth, and sometimes even small changes can build over time into something much larger. Still, turning points matter, and for many viewers, the legal marriage feels like one of those turning points, a moment where the direction began to change, even if that change wasn't immediately visible. Now, looking at the present, the Brown family is no longer what it once was. Each member is navigating their own path, making their own decisions, redefining what family means to them individually. And while that may represent loss in some ways, it also represents growth, because sometimes change, no matter how difficult, is necessary. As we move into the next part, we'll explore how fans and social media have reacted to these revelations, especially the idea that Janelle may now be exposing new details. Because in today's world, audience reaction doesn't just reflect the story, it becomes part of it. As the idea that Janelle Brown may be revealing new insights about the legal marriage continues to spread, the reaction from fans of Sister Wives has been nothing short of explosive. Within hours of clips, discussions, and theories circulating online, social media platforms were flooded with opinions. And just like in previous controversies, the audience quickly divided into different camps. On one side, there are fans who feel vindicated. Viewers who have long questioned the legal marriage between Kody Brown and Robyn Brown now see this as confirmation of what they suspected all along. They believe that the decision was not as simple or as selfless as it was originally presented, that it may have shifted power within the family, and that those shifts contributed directly to the breakdown we're seeing today. For these fans, Janelle's perspective adds credibility because she has often been viewed as one of the most grounded and straightforward voices in the family, someone who doesn't typically engage in drama. So if she is now speaking out or even hinting at deeper issues, it carries weight. But on the other side, there are viewers who are more cautious. They question whether the current narrative is being driven more by interpretation than by confirmed facts. They point out that reality TV is heavily edited, that moments can be taken out of context, and that it's important not to jump to conclusions without hearing directly from all sides involved. This divide has created intense discussions online. Fans are analyzing past episodes, rewatching key moments, comparing what was said then to what is being suggested now. And in doing so, they are building their own versions of the story. Some focus on body language, others on tone, others on patterns of behavior that have developed over time. It's no longer just about one decision.
It's about the entire history of the family, and how that history is being reinterpreted through a new lens. One of the most interesting aspects of this reaction is how quickly narratives form. A single comment, a brief clip, a small piece of information, and suddenly a larger story begins to take shape. That's the power of social media. It doesn't just reflect opinion, it amplifies it. And as more people join the conversation, certain ideas gain momentum. They get repeated, shared, expanded, until they begin to feel like established truths, even when the full picture may still be unclear. For Robyn Brown, this kind of attention is not new. She has often been at the center of fan debates, but the current situation adds a new layer, because now the discussion is being tied directly to a major turning point in the family's history, the legal marriage, and that connection makes the conversation more intense, more personal, more emotionally charged. At the same time, Kody Brown is also facing renewed scrutiny. Fans are revisiting his decisions, his explanations, his role in shaping the family dynamic, and asking whether his actions aligned with the values he often spoke about. Was fairness truly maintained? Were all relationships given equal effort? Or did certain choices create an imbalance that grew over time? These questions don't have simple answers, but they are driving the current discussion. Another key factor is how quickly opinions can solidify. In the fast-moving world of online conversation, first impressions matter, and once people form an opinion, it can be difficult to change, even if new information emerges later. This creates a situation where perception becomes just as important as reality, because what people believe shapes how they interpret everything that follows. For Janelle Brown, this means that her words, whether direct or implied, are being analyzed more closely than ever. Every statement, every reaction, every moment, all of it is being examined for meaning, and that level of attention can amplify even the smallest detail. As the conversation continues to grow, one thing is clear. This is no longer just about a past decision. It's about how that decision is understood today, and how it fits into the larger story of the Brown family. As we move into the next part, we'll explore how this controversy may impact the future, both for the individuals involved and for the direction of Sister Wives itself. Because when a story reaches this level of attention, what happens next becomes just as important as what came before.
As the conversation around Janelle Brown and the legal marriage continues to gain momentum, the focus naturally shifts to one big question: what happens next? Because in a story as long-running and emotionally layered as Sister Wives, major revelations don't just stay in the past. They shape the future. And right now, the future of the Brown family feels more uncertain than ever. One of the biggest areas of impact is how relationships will evolve moving forward. The family has already gone through significant changes, with Christine Brown leaving and growing distance between Kody and both Janelle Brown and Meri Brown. The structure that once defined the family has shifted dramatically. Now, with renewed focus on the legal marriage, those shifts may be re-examined in an even deeper way. For Kody Brown, this could mean facing new questions, not just from fans, but potentially from within the family itself. If past decisions are being revisited, it may lead to conversations that were never fully explored before. Conversations about fairness, about communication, about whether everyone felt equally valued during key moments in the family's history. These are not easy discussions, but they are often necessary for growth. At the same time, there's the question of how Robyn Brown will navigate this renewed attention. Being at the center of a major turning point already placed her in a unique position within the family. Now, with that moment being re-examined, the spotlight is even stronger. Every action moving forward may be interpreted through this lens, every interaction analyzed for signs of change or consistency. This creates both pressure and opportunity. Pressure because expectations are high and opinions are divided. Opportunity because it allows for the possibility of reshaping perception over time, through actions, through communication, through how relationships are handled going forward. For Janelle, this moment could represent something different, a chance to clarify her perspective, to share insight into how decisions were experienced from her point of view, and to contribute to a more complete understanding of the family's history. Her voice has always been one of practicality and balance, so if she is now stepping forward with new details, it could influence how the entire narrative is understood. Another important factor is the next generation. The children, many of whom are now adults, have grown up within this unique family structure. They've witnessed the changes, the tensions, the transitions, and their perspectives, whether shared publicly or not, are part of the story as well. How these dynamics affect them moving forward is something many fans are paying closer attention to, because the impact of these decisions doesn't stop with the adults. It extends to everyone connected to the family.
There's also the future of the show itself. Reality television thrives on evolving narratives, and this situation adds a new layer of depth to an already complex story. Producers may choose to explore these questions more directly, to revisit past decisions, to highlight conversations that provide clarity or even more intrigue. At the same time, they may take a more subtle approach, allowing the story to unfold naturally through interactions and developments. Either way, the direction of future episodes could be shaped by how strongly this topic resonates with the audience, and based on current reactions, that resonance is significant. Finally, there's the broader question of identity. What does the Brown family look like now? What does it mean to be part of the structure after so many changes? And how do individual members define their roles moving forward? These are questions that don't have immediate answers, but they are central to what comes next. Because while the past provides context, it's the future that determines the outcome. As we move into the final part, we'll bring everything together, looking at what this revelation means in the bigger picture, and why it continues to capture so much attention from fans around the world. Because in a story this layered, every chapter builds on the one before it, and this chapter may be one of the most important yet. As we reach the end of this deep dive into the controversy surrounding Janelle Brown and the legal marriage between Kody Brown and Robyn Brown, one thing becomes clear. This story is not just about one decision. It's about everything that decision may have set in motion. For years, fans of Sister Wives accepted the explanation that the legal marriage was done for practical reasons, to secure a better future for Robyn's children and strengthen the family. And at the time, that explanation felt complete. It made sense. It aligned with the values the family often spoke about. But as time has passed and as the family has evolved, that moment has taken on a new meaning. Because now it's being viewed not just as a legal step, but as a turning point. A moment that may have shifted balance, changed relationships, and influenced the direction of everything that followed. What makes this situation so compelling is the timing. Why is this conversation gaining momentum now? Why are fans, and possibly members of the family, revisiting a decision from years ago? The answer lies in what we've seen happen since. The separations, the distance, the transformation of the family structure. With Christine Brown leaving and both Janelle Brown and Meri Brown stepping into more independent roles, the original vision of the Brown family has changed dramatically. And when major changes happen, people naturally look back. They search for the moments that may have led to where things are now. Moments that, at the time, didn't seem as significant, but in hindsight feel like the beginning of something much bigger. For many viewers, the legal marriage is one of those moments, not because it was necessarily wrong, but because of what it may have represented. A shift in structure, a shift in priority, a shift in how relationships were experienced within the family. And now, with Janelle Brown potentially offering new insight, that moment is being re-examined with fresh perspective. Her voice matters in this conversation, because she has often been seen as grounded, measured, someone who observes more than she reacts. So if she is now speaking, or even hinting at deeper issues, it adds weight to the discussion. It suggests that there may have been more complexity behind the scenes than what was originally shown. But at the same time, it's important to approach this with balance, because reality television, including Sister Wives, is only a partial view of reality. Editing, storytelling, and perspective all play a role in shaping what viewers see. There are conversations that happen off camera, feelings that are not fully expressed, details that remain private. So while the narrative is compelling, it's not necessarily complete. And that's what makes this story so layered. There is no single truth that captures everything. Instead, there are multiple perspectives, each shaped by different experiences, emotions, and interpretations. For Kody Brown, this moment may represent a reflection point, a chance to consider how past decisions have influenced the present. For Robyn Brown, it may be a moment of scrutiny, but also an opportunity to show growth or provide clarity. And for Janelle, it may be a moment of voice, a chance to share her perspective in a way that adds depth to a story that fans have been trying to understand for years. Ultimately, what happens next will determine how this chapter is remembered. Will it lead to new understanding, new conversations, new directions for the family? Or will it remain part of the ongoing mystery that keeps viewers engaged? Because that's the power of a story like this. It doesn't end with one revelation. It evolves. It changes. It continues to unfold. And as fans, we are not just watching. We are interpreting, questioning, and connecting the pieces. That's why this moment feels so significant. Not just because of what it reveals, but because of what it represents. A deeper look into the choices, relationships, and realities that have shaped the Brown family over time. And as Sister Wives moves forward, one thing is certain. The conversation isn't over. In fact, it may just be getting started.